Hello, I'm Andre J, and I am here to tell you today about some of the neat new updates I have made to the Spectral Mesh video synthesizer. I'm going to also sort of try to do this as an all-encompassing video tutorial, intro, whatever, manual to the whole thing, because enough things have changed in this update that it just kind of warrants, like, let's just call this, like, let's just explain the whole thing, because why not? Yeah, so let's just start off from the top. If you don't know what the spectral mesh is, it is based on the idea of a scan processing synthesis. This was influenced by the main thing this was influenced by was a video synthesizer, an analog video synthesizer called the Scanimate. If you read the manual on my website, I'll say there's a little bit more up there, but I would just like to take a moment here to say thanks a lot to Dave from Scanimate.com. Check out Scanimate.com if you're interested in the Scanimate in general, and they have a lot of really nice information in there, and I actually had some questions about how some of the oscillators worked on there, and they were really helpful, and glad to provide information. So yeah, check them out, and thanks a bunch. But yeah, so I'm not going to explain scan processing synthesis here because that would take way too long, and I wrote a bunch about it, so just go check out the words. You can also check out Scanimate.com because they've written way more words, and it's from someone who actually understands it a lot more than I do. So yeah. But loosely speaking, it's you feed a video signal in, and then you do things to stretch, warp, displace, and modify the sort of position of the video signal. And this one can do it via either using the brightness of its own video signal or via the 3 oscillators that it has inside of it. And I'll definitely go into a lot more of that later. But let me just go through the controls sort of in order of how they appear. So the default control thing for this is one of these controllers right here. You can see mine. I've written all of the MIDI CC values on everything so I can remember things for programming. It's pretty easy. But yeah, so first things off is we have the key, the knob all the way on the left. This is for luma keying. Apologies for this capture. It seems to be doing some wonky interlacing things here and there. It does not, when you look at this on a CRT or an HDMI thing, there's none of this little interlacing nonsense happening. So what are you going to do? Yeah, so you turn the knob, and default is set to luma key out the black. Just means it replaces that with the background. And then I hit this little luma key invert button here, and it does the exact opposite. It luma keys out the whitest parts. So this is pretty handy. I'll show you how this comes in handy later. But yeah, that is luma key. And then the 2 knobs right over to the side, these are displacement knobs. So the first one will displace X as a function of brightness. So I'm doing this right now, and you can see it's moving all these things over in the X direction, depending on how bright they are. And the one right next to that is going to move things over how bright they are on the Y direction. It's a little bit more dramatic if I do it on one of the different modes. So let me just quick show you. There's 4 different modes, graphical modes of representation. The default one is just the video that you can stretch like this, and it looks mostly like video until you start to do these things, and you can kind of see that it's what we're working with is a little standard issue triangle mesh kind of deal where you can warp the vertexes and whatnot. But these buttons, the ones that look like fast forward, rewind, stop, play, and record on my controller, these are the buttons that you use to control the different kinds of meshes. So if I hit the one that looks like, I don't know, is it fast forward? It's 2 arrows going to the right. then it switches over into the vertical line mode, and this is the one you recognize from if you're familiar with the walkthru video synthesizer. This is pretty close to how that looked. Of course, the walkthru was influenced by the Scanimate. Scanimate, you don't ever see this sort of thing in the Scanimate's finished output because they used a colorizer at the end of the chain. A really beautiful, lush colorizer, whereas the walkthru was just the scope thing. But you can see a lot more clearly what's happening to the brightness with the displacement here. And then I have another button here which changes the way that brightness displacement works. So you can see here what's happening is that the darkest stuff stays where it's at, and the brightest stuff moves around. And then you hit this invert button, and what happens is the brightest stuff stays where it's at, and the darkest stuff moves around. So it's pretty subtle. It's a subtle difference, but I find it really handy, and yeah, I think it's pretty cool, so that's why it's left in. Feel free to let me know if you think that it's not handy or whatever. I'm very open to user suggestions and comments. But yeah, so this is what you can do with just the brightness displacement knobs. It's pretty fun. And then, yeah, let me just go through the different modes now. So this is... Oh yeah, something else I changed in this version is that I've made it so you can have a lot higher... You can choose to have higher resolutions, like higher vertex resolutions in these modes, at the cost of frame rates. So things will slow down when you try to do really, really high density things. But you have this knob all the way over to the right-hand side. This knob has two components to it. So you use this. When you move it around, like I'm moving it around right now and it doesn't seem to do anything. Let me turn this all the way over to the right, and then let me select a different mode. So let me hit the stop button, which will select the horizontal line mode. You can see, oh, there's just one line there. And then I turn it up a little bit, and I hit the button again, and you see there's more lines. So you see I'm right at about noon here. If I keep this knob at noon, I'm guaranteed 30 frames per second and no slowdown whatsoever. And then I turn it all the way up, and you can see there's a lot more resolution. Oh yeah, by the way, you can't really do mode changing on the fly. So that's just basically, at the moment, that's just like out of the question. So, because when you change the modes, it takes a lot of processing power to do that. So every time you change the mode, you're going to get a slowdown almost no matter what for like a half second. And what you do is, what I usually do is just hit another button really quick, and it'll zip back up to 30. But yeah, just keep that in mind. Mode shifting, you kind of have to pick a mode and stick with it. I'll try to figure out a way to do it better in the future, but for now, this is just what we got to work with. I'm like, you know, I'm a pretty good programmer in some ways, and in some ways I'm pretty dumb. This might just be one of those really, like, dumb, obvious things that I'm missing, but, you know, this is what we got right now. And, oh yeah, so I added another button which turns things to grayscale. So that's pretty handy, and I like it for some very abstract things. It sort of adds a different layer of depth to everything. There's alpha happening in the grayscale too, which I'll show you more about in just a second. But, so while we're on this knob, the resolution knob here, let me show you something that happens here. So maybe if I zoom in a bit, we can see what's happening. So sometimes when you have like the really, really thin lines, let me see if we can get this happening. Thin lines in when they're sampled from a digital zone into an analog zone, thin white lines can sometimes have like, there we go, you can see chromatic distortion happening. So there's like the little rainbow things happening on the corners of the white. The way that you can, so I like that. I think it's pretty fun sometimes, but sometimes you don't want it. Also, sometimes if you're trying to like plug this into an older video mixer that's like too analog, you're gonna have the problem where it's hard to key into something that's this fine. So you need to have thicker lines. So if you hit this record button on the nano control, what that does is it changes the same knob that selects resolution, and it changes it so that it thickens the lines a bit. It's definitely not continuous. There's just like a couple of steps to it. But yeah, you see if you just notch it up, so we've got chroma distortion happening right there, and then I just notch it up one more, and we don't have that chromatic distortion happening. So, and then the thick lines kind of like add like another layer of like depth to everything. So yeah, I was just doing the oscillators. Let me turn off the oscillator for a moment. The next thing that we have is, oh yeah, there's like a classic grid mode. Oh yeah. So that's just this, you know, it's just a nice grid. Who doesn't like a nice grid? Grids are some of my favorite. But yeah, you can do this sort of thing with the grid. That's pretty nifty. And then switch back over to video. Here we are, video. So what I was saying before is black and white mode has alpha. What that means is this is transparent. So I can show you what that means. So see where the video is sort of curling over itself? That's what the transparency means, is that as the video folds over itself, you can see the things happening behind it. And then as I start to key things out, you see we have weird abstract shape things going on, and that's kind of what the keying thing is about. Cool. So I think that's the basic modes we have. Oh yeah, we also have an invert switch. So if I invert while we're on black and white, it just inverts black and white. The luma key will still work the same way it did before the inversion. So if I invert, it doesn't change how the luma key works, if that makes sense, because the luma key is applied before the inversion. And then if I do luma key invert and then invert like that, you see what's happening, right? So yeah, that's basically what's up. Oh yeah, and then if you invert with color turned on, it inverts all the colors as well. And this can do some pretty nifty things as well. Pretty handy if you have something that you can do luma key into white into. A lot of this is aimed at one of the purposes of this thing I have designed it for is to be used with other video mixers so you can key stuff in. So that's why we have the things like you can select the different resolution and select different line thicknesses. So like something like this, where you can do like really thick lines, that's pretty much all the way up. And you could try like zooming in a bunch and keying into the lines. That would be pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to take a break that you won't notice because I'm just going to edit this together, and then I will talk about oscillators. Hello, I am back. So yeah, let's talk about the oscillators now. Fun fact is, when I started making this, I thought like video oscillators, oh yeah, it's just easy, I'll figure it out. And it turns out I didn't know diddly squat about video oscillators. But now I've figured out a bunch more. The first draft had some pretty good shit going on, but I think you'll be very happy with the improvements I've made this time. But yeah, let's just start with let's talk about depth oscillator. So I have 3 controls for each oscillator, and I call them frequency, rate, and amplitude. And so if I turn up frequency, and I turn up amplitude on the Z, this is what I see happening. It just makes the whole thing blob it, like zoom in and out. Oh yeah, there's another thing on here too. There's just a zoom function. I can zoom in and out. You can zoom. I should really fix that in the next update. You shouldn't be able to zoom out of the video. Actually, I wonder if you zoom in and then displace things a lot. Is it? Yeah, I should fix that. That's pretty silly. Oh well. Fix that next time. But yeah, so frequency all the way up, frequency all the way up, and then amplitude all the way up, and you see this. And then if I start to turn the rate up, what happens? So it starts to bubble in and out, and So rate is, wait, am I doing this backwards? Yeah, rate is change between frames, and frequency. This is frequency that I'm turning up. This is rate and amplitude turned up, and then here's frequency. Frequency is how many times in the screen you see an oscillation happen. So this is sort of the thing that I had to learn the hard way just by trying to program it, is that when you're dealing with video oscillators, as opposed to audio oscillators, you have to deal with the fact that you're dealing with an oscillation in a two-dimensional system as opposed to a one-dimensional system. So there's sort of two frequency components, and I don't know if there is like a general standard for how people talk about frequency and rate, because in the different video synthesis schematics I've seen, it seems to be somewhat, people just pick a term and go with it. Yeah, so that's what's happened. Everything is turned up to max right now. And you see everything's centered right in the middle, so it sort of looks like ripples that would happen. And then two of these controls are bipolar and one of them is unipolar. I can't remember exactly why I did that. I probably had a reason. I'll double check it sometime. But you see it's centered right in the middle. And I have these other two controls which actually will change where the center is. So you can pull the center off of the screen if you want, so you get these kind of ripples happening. And I turn the rate, turn the frequency way down, and then you get this really fun scrolling thing. And as I've changed the center of displacement, we get this kind of thing going on. So that's pretty cool. This is neither here nor there, but I will be having, the next big update for this will have parameter locking on that. So I'm working on that. I already have this demo beta testing out there for the wave pool of parameter locking. Parameter locking means I can do these sort of things on the controller, and then it'll record it and just loop whatever things I change on the controller. This is very similar if you've ever played with Electron synths, or I think the Teenage Engineering ones have them too. It really adds a lot to this. But yeah, so this is, default wave shape is a sine wave, and then we have 4 total wave shapes for every oscillator. Here's a square wave, and we can see what happens as I change amplitude on the square wave. And then we have a saw wave. And then we have smooth noise. This is a Perlin noise displacement. And this is definitely like a strong goal of mine to have Perlin noise in here, because I think noise oscillators are just the best. So yeah, that's the Z oscillator. Let me turn this one off mostly. And then let's look at X oscillator. So I'll turn up rate and amplitude. So you can see, just like the Z one was doing, turning up rate and amplitude just kind of makes the image shake back and forth. And then, so this one's bipolar. Let me turn up frequency a bit, and you can see it's stretching things in the X direction. Whee! So that's a sine wave. Now let's look at the square wave. Saw wave. Oh yeah, there is also 2 different rates you can have, or 2 different I'm getting so confused on this frequency rate things. 2 different speeds you can have. So if you hit the S button next to the rate button, that'll double the speeds that you can have. So basic speeds kind of go from pretty slow to pretty slow, and then you speed things up and it goes a little bit faster. Definitely let me know how you feel about these rates too. I like things nice and slow myself, but I'm not opposed to speeding things up or even slowing them down even further if people think that that is more important to them. And then yeah, we've also got smooth Perlin noise. What a fun time it is to have Perlin noise as an oscillator. You can see what happens if we turn the rate all the way off. You have frequency all the way up. Let me see if I can get rate all the way off. So we can just use this as a static displacement if we don't have if we have rate set at 0. So this is what a static displacement looks like. So this can be pretty handy in a couple of ways, and I'll show you once I get into the phase mod and ring mod section. We'll see some more neat things. But first let me go over, here's Y. And you can see that's wobbling things in a sine wave in the Y way. Here's a square wave, saw wave, noise wave. And I'm going to start to turn up some of the displacement things a bit. So X and Y displacement are turned up a bit. Let me turn on the grayscale too. Rad. Okay, so the Perlin noise things are new, but the other sort of big thing that I added in this one, which is I think really nifty, is so you've really kind of got these 3 basic oscillators and these 4 basic shapes for each oscillator. So we can see what happens when we combine them. Like, that's pretty fun. Turn up the rates on some of these. So here's just an X and a Y oscillator together. That's pretty nice and hypnotic. Let me key some stuff out so we get a more abstract thing happening here. You can see what happens so Y is set to noise right now, X is set to sine. If I set them both to noise, we get this kind of a thing happening. And then let me turn the Z oscillator on, and maybe we turn this one on, saw wave. You can see that's pretty neat. There's a lot you can do with just this. But the thing about there was like with the older scan processing systems is you were able to do a bit more complicated things with oscillators, because you could also feed in other external oscillators in. So you had more control and you had more complex systems that you could do. And so I wanted to make sure that you had a lot of nifty oscillation that you could play with inside of here. So what I've done is I've added switches that turn on and off cascading ring modulation and phase modulation for each one. So what cascading ring modulation means is, ring modulation is just where you take 2 signals and multiply them together. So let's turn everything off right now, try to get back to pretty much steady state, no oscillations, which is definitely not happening, but I will try to fix up zeroing things out in the next one too, while I'm at it. But yeah, so I'll just show you what ring modulation means. So here, let me turn on the Z oscillator. Let me center it back so you can see it a bit more clearly. Center this right in the middle. This is just your standard Z oscillator. But if you turn on ring modulation with all the other oscillators turned off, nothing happens, because the ring modulation is keyed into the Y oscillator. So once I turn up Y, then we'll see what that is doing to the Z oscillator. So it's modulating the amplitude at the same rate that the Y oscillator is moving. And it's the frequency matters too. So if I turn frequency off, you can see it just sort of like globally changes the amplitude of everything. But then if I turn the frequency up, then it does a bit more dynamic things. Let me make this back to the sine wave. Maybe we can see what's happening a little bit better. So yeah, here I've turned the Y, everything all the way up, and we can see how that's modulating the Z. And then if I turn turn the modulation off, we can see what the difference is. So here's ring mod off, ring mod on. So yeah, that's like a lot that you can do with a pretty simple thing. And then a fun fact is what I mean by cascading ring mod is that if I then turn ring mod on the Y, this means that X mod, or the X LFO, will do ring mod on the Y LFO, which will do ring mod on the Z LFO. So that's what cascading means, is each one of these will cascade modulate each one in sequence. So thicken up the lines a little bit here. Show you I can turn off that chroma distortion whenever I want. So here's me turning up and down the X. So we're getting some really, really crazy complex shapes happening here, which you couldn't do in the last version. So that's pretty amazing. And then we also have phase modulation on each one of these oscillators too. So if I turn on the phase modulation for Z, we can see what happens with that. Phase modulation and ring modulation are both terms you might know from audio synthesis. Ring mod is like that sort of thing that like a lot of synths will label it as cross mod or whatever, or I think like there was like Moog pedals that did it and stuff. It was a pretty common like science fiction effect because it would take familiar sounds and you just feed them in the ring mod thing and it would make them sound super robotic. I think it was used as like special effects a lot in the 70s for like evil robots and science fiction things. And then phase mod, most people know phase modulation because pretty much every synthesizer you have that says it's frequency modulation is actually doing phase modulation. So yeah, your Yamaha DX7 is actually, it says it's an FM synthesizer because they patented, you know, like the idea of FM synthesis somehow back in the 70s. Because, I don't know, that's how like, what was it, Stanford? That's how Stanford works. They probably like made a lot of money off of that or something. But it was actually phase modulation. And if you're interested in phase modulation and ring modulation, I probably won't go into too much here, but they're really simple ways, and at the very least they're very simple in digital systems, ways to get dynamic things happening with really just a simple couple of oscillators. And here, let me just turn on phase modulation on everything. So we'll dynamically modulate the phase of each one of these by one another. So yeah, here we go. Doing all kinds of phase modulations here. Speed everything up, zoom it out, zoom it in. Let's displace some things, XY displacement on things. And yeah, let's turn on amplitude modulation on everything too. So yeah, this is some pretty crazy movements happening down here. Yeah, you can kind of see where I'm at in here though. So the part of the goal I had is wanted to make it kind of easy to go from like barely recognizable video input to like totally distorted, unbelievably non-recognizable video input. And that's pretty much just like turning up and down the amplitude on everything when everything's modulating everything else. We'll sort of go into those modes pretty quickly. Okay, let's just see what pure phase modulation looks like. This is phase mod. Everything's phase modding everything else. We're all on sine waves right now. Let's mix it up a bit, and let's make every one of these waves different. Turn noise on Z, square on Y, and saw on... square on X and saw on Y. So here we go. And let's see what happens when I turn on. Let's turn off all the modulations. And then let me try just turning amplitude modulation on Y. What? Whoa. Oh yeah, here's a really nifty one. Let me turn everything back off again. Let's try to reset everything at more or less default. So here's a pretty fun one. Let me turn up Y a bit. Turn the frequency and the rates down to really, really low. So here's some Y things happening. And let me turn up X a bit. See if we just kind of do this subtly, it just sort of like wiggles and stretches back and forth. If I stop rate on both of them, it'll just freeze it wherever it's at. So if you ever just want to like freeze frame something, you just freeze it by turning the rate controls down. And then let me turn on amplitude modulation on Y. And turn rate and amplitude up a lot on the X. You can see frequency, rate, and amplitude are pretty low on the Y. And let me start to dial up the frequency on X, and here we go. I really like this mode, where it just sort of like curls over itself like that. Pretty big fan of this one. And let's see what happens when I turn color back on. Let's see what happens when I turn video mode back on. Let me get this stretching video thing that warps. But yeah, this will be... Can't wait to get the parameter lock thing set up, properly set up on this and on the wave pool, because that's going to be a really exciting thing. Also can't wait to get the audio reactive thing set up on both of these. And I can't wait, but I will have to wait because I'm really slow at soldering, and analog design is not my forte on the CV things, but I assure you I'm still working on that stuff. I've gotten some pretty significant work done on that, especially considering I had barely any idea and no experience in this to begin with. So that's coming along slowly but surely. But yeah, I think that is about it for what's going on in the spectral mesh these days. So yeah, you can check out the text manual that I have over at andrejcreativecoding.com. Check out the GitHub page for more information on doing this DIY. Check out my Etsy shop if you want to just buy one of these dang things, and stop by the Video Waves Facebook group if you want to like share what you've been making with this and talk about the weird video synthesizer hardwares and softwares that I make with other folks too. But yeah, thanks a lot, and I hope you have fun, and alright, see ya!